Okay, so you know those random wood scraps that sit in the corner of the garage forever because you swear you're going to use them someday? Well, today is that day. We're turning cedar fence picket cutoffs, some paint, stain, and farmhouse molds into this rustic little farm fresh frame. And yes, a few things broke along the way because apparently I like a little drama with my DIYs. Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're making this rustic farmhouse frame, and I'm honestly kind of obsessed with how it turned out. It has that chippy white background, the dark stained frame, the little stacked farm animals, and that cute Farm Fresh sign at the top. This is one of those projects that looks way fancier than it actually is. And my favorite part? We use scrap wood. I love a good, I saved this for no reason and now I'm proud of myself moment. So grab your coffee, your paintbrush, your glue, and maybe a little patience because we're going full farmhouse today. So first we're starting with the frame itself. This was made using cutoffs from cedar fence pickets, which is basically DIY gold if you ask me. I don't know what it is about scrap wood, but I cannot throw it away. I'll be standing there with a 6-inch piece of wood like, no, this has potential. And then it lives in a pile for 6 months. But see, this is why we keep scraps. Once the pieces were cut down and assembled into a frame shape, we used a pre-stain conditioner before staining. Cedar can be a little dramatic with stains, so the conditioner helps everything absorb a little more evenly instead of getting weird and blotchy. Next, we're staining the frame using General Finishes gel stain in the color black. And listen, black stain is one of my favorite ways to make something look old, moody, and expensive without actually spending expensive money. It gives this frame such a rich, rustic look. I'm applying the stain and working it into the wood, making sure it gets into all those little grooves and edges. The frame has a chunky farmhouse film already, but the black stain really helps it feel finished and intentional. This is also the part where I usually get stains somewhere it absolutely should not be, like my elbow, the table, probably my coffee cup. So maybe don't be like me, put something down first. So now I've had this stain sit on there for about 10 or 15 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and wipe it back now, wipe off any excess just to make sure. And generally what I like to do when I use, especially a gel stain, because it kind of sits on the top layer of the wood, it doesn't really soak in as much as like a water-based stain or an oil-based stain would. So I normally like to let it sit for about 24 hours just so I don't get the black stain on my fingers if I pick it up or work with it or do anything along those lines. Now for the backing. We're using a piece of 1/4-inch plywood and painting it white. For this project, we used Paint Couture mineral paint in purely white, and it only needed 1 coat. 1 coat is always a happy little surprise, right? Because in my head, I always plan for 1 coat and then reality says, cute, do 3. But this covered really nicely, gave us that bright base we needed before adding the faux barnwood detail. After painting, we used the heat gun to speed up the drying time. And let me just say, the heat gun is for those of us who have absolutely no patience. I know paint needs time to dry, I respect that. I just don't always participate in that lifestyle. Once the white paint was dry, we grabbed the Barnwood plank stamp by Iron Orchid Designs to add a faux wood look to the background. This step is what really starts pulling the whole farmhouse vibe together. The stamp gives you that aged, weathered wood look without having to actually find perfectly weathered wood, clean it, then sand it, and wonder what mysterious outdoor life it had before it came into your house. We're just stamping right over the white painted plywood, letting some areas be a little darker and some a little lighter. You don't want it to be too perfect. The charm is in the imperfect rustic look. After stamping, we use the heat gun again to heat set the ink. This helps prevent smudging later when we add waxes or top coats. And trust me, there's nothing more heartbreaking than getting a stamped background just right and then smearing it with your hand 2 minutes later. Been there and absolutely hated that. So now let's talk about the farm animals. For these, we poured the molds using perfect casting powder and let them set for at least an hour. This is the part where you really do have to walk away and let them do their thing, which is hard because I always want to poke at it like, are you done? How about now? What about now? Once they're set, we demolded the animals, and this is where the project decided to humble us a little bit. The cow's legs broke, the pig's tail broke, because of course they did. But honestly, this is such a normal DIY moment. I feel like every project has that one little point where you think, well, that's ruined. And then 5 minutes later, you're gluing it back together like nothing ever happened. So that's exactly what we did. We just glued the broken pieces back together and kept going. After the molds were repaired, we painted them black as the base layer. This gives them a really nice depth, especially once we start adding some highlights later. The black base helps all those raised details stand out. It also keeps the animals looking aged and rustic instead of too bright or new. And this is where the project starts to look a little weird before it looks good. That happens all the time. There's always a stage where you're staring at it thinking, I don't know, this might be ugly. But you have to push through the ugly middle. The ugly middle is where the magic is hiding. Once the molds were painted and dry, we attached them to the frame backing using Aleene's tacky glue. We stacked the animals with the cow on the bottom, the pig in the middle, and the rooster on top. It gives the whole piece that classic farmhouse market feel, almost like something you'd find tucked in a cute little antique booth. I love how dimensional the molds make this. It's not just a flat sign. It has texture and character, and it feels more handmade and collected. Next, we're working on that little sign at the top. We stained a 6 by 2 inch sign using the same General Finishes black gel stain that we used on the frame. Then we wiped back the excess so it still had that worn rustic look instead of being too solid and flat. For the lettering, we created a stencil in Cricut Design Space and cut it out using the Cricut Explorer 1. The stencil says Farm Fresh with the smaller wording underneath, and it just completes the whole look. All right, so it's time to create the stencil for the sign that's gonna go on the project. And I'm using Cricut, and I'm gonna go ahead and just do a new project, and then I'm gonna start from a blank canvas. And then I'm gonna go ahead and click the Start Designing in the bottom right corner. And this is gonna give me a canvas that I can start to kind of create what I want the sign to look like. Now the cool thing is, and they're available everywhere and for free. I think Google has quite a few of them, but there is a stencil font. And so I'm gonna go ahead and type what I want the sign to say in this box where it says text. So you'll click the T on the left-hand side first, and then that'll give you this placeholder text. And then as you can see, I can't all of a sudden spell Farm Fresh, go figure. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and move that up. And so now the piece of wood that I'm putting this on is a 6 by 2. So it's 6 inches by 2 inches. And that's how I cut it out. So I need everything to fit within that area. So I'm creating my stencil to be roughly that size. And so the second line of this is going to say eggs, meat, and dairy. And it's just kind of something that I thought was kind of cool. And I think I saw another sign that had it on it, but I'm kind of creating my own version of it. So I'll go ahead and size all this down to kind of get it to fit. And then once I do that, I'll go ahead and start putting the fonts that I want to use on here. The first one that I'm using is called Stardos. That's STARDOS, which you'll see here. I've got all this stuff kind of already picked out. I'm gonna go ahead and type in the search bar the name of the font that I want. And I think Cricut already has the Google fonts loaded in it. So the minute you do that, you should be able to search it. If it's not in there, you'll have to load them onto your computer. So we're gonna go ahead and use Stardos. So as you can see, it's already got lines in it. So when I go ahead and create the stencils, which I did with Mylar, I ordered some Mylar on Amazon. And so that's what I'm going to use in the Cricut to kind of create these stencils. So that way it's reusable. So if I ever want to do this project again or use the stencil on something else, I can do that. And then the other one was 4th Avenue, I think was the name of it. I'll have to double check it. I'll put links in the description of all the fonts that I use. So that way you have access to it if you decide to do the same project. So now that we've got that on there, I'm going to go ahead and also, I found some flourishes to put on the sides just to kind of spruce it up a little bit. I didn't want it to just be words on there. I thought that'd be too plain. So I found some flourishes to add to either side of the eggs, meat, and dairy part of the sign. So that kind of adds a little extra design detail on there. So once I have my sign put together, now the next step is to go ahead and have the Cricut machine cut out the stencil. So all you basically do is you have to go down first. You select all of the layers in the side panel on the right, and you hover over the combined option. Once you hover over that option, you'll select the option that says weld, and that basically puts everything together into one layer. So when you go to cut it out, it'll all be one stencil. If you don't do that, it's gonna put everything in there separately. It looks at each of the different items that you add to your canvas as a separate item. So you don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that you use the weld option to make it all one layer, and then you just let the Cricut machine do what it does. Now on mine, we have two different ones. We have the Explorer one, which is like the first generation Cricut machine. And on that one, I put it on the option that's custom. So that way it can I can kind of mess with the pressure and things of that nature. If you have one of the later models, maker models, you can I think the option is on there. At any rate, so we're gonna go ahead and cut this stencil out, and then we're gonna move on to the next stage. The stencil that we used a paint sponge from Dollar Tree and the same Paint Couture Purely White paint. And can we just appreciate Dollar Tree craft supplies for a second? Because sometimes the cheapest little sponge ends up being exactly what you need. Fancy tools are great, but I never turn down a budget-friendly win. Once the sign was dry, we attached it to the backing. Then the whole backing piece was glued to the frame using Aleene's tacky glue. And just to make sure it was really secure, we added a few staples too. This is one of those steps where I like having a little extra insurance. Glue is great, but staples make me feel like, okay, now you're not going anywhere. Especially with a dimensional piece like this, where you've got molds, a sign, and layers happening, I'd rather over-secure it than have something pop loose later. Now it's time to age everything up a little bit. First, we applied Debbie's DIY Clear Wax as the protective layer. The clear wax also gives you more control before adding dark wax, because dark wax can get intense really fast. And if you've ever used dark wax, you know exactly what I mean. 1 second it's beautiful and vintage, and the next second it looks like your project survived a chimney fire. So we started with clear wax, wiped back the excess, and then went in with the dark wax to add that aged, rustic look. This step really helps tone everything down and makes the whole piece feel like it has been around for a while, in a good way. Like cute old farmhouse decor, not found in a damp basement old. For the final detail, we use antique gold rubbing buff to highlight the molds. This is one of my favorite finishing touches because it catches all those raised details on the farm animals and the little embellishments. It gives everything that aged metal look and makes the texture pop. You don't need a lot here, just a tiny bit on your finger or a small brush, then lightly hit the high points. This is also the step where I have to remind myself to stop, because rubbing buff is one of those products where you think, oh, just a little more, and suddenly everything is gold. So we're being responsible today, mostly. And here it is, all finished. We've got the dark rustic frame, the white faux barnwood background, the farm fresh sign, the stacked farm animals, and those antique gold highlights that bring out all the detail. I love that this started with cedar fence picket scraps and turned into something that looks like it belongs in a cozy farmhouse kitchen, a market display, or a little vintage booth. And honestly, this is why I love DIY so much. You can take leftovers, broken pieces, paint, glue, and a little bit of stubbornness and end up with something completely charming. So what do you think? Would you keep this one classic farmhouse, or would you switch it up with a different sign? Maybe Market Fresh, Homestead, or something seasonal? Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for more DIY, upcycles, and projects where we pretend everything went exactly according to plan. See you in the next one.